Chag Sameach, everybody, and hello from Jerusalem. Yes, we are in a different existential state of being since we already woke up this morning and started a new day. But I think we can still share the universal excitement of being together and studying together. And we will share this time slot, hopefully in both an equal way and in a way that will create the unique perspectives that the two of us bring into this topic. I would like to start by saying that the term social distance, which became a universal term, actually took on an interesting meaning here in Jerusalem, because if one thing that we are privileged as Yerushalmim, as Jerusalemites, was the fact that we are in Jerusalem 365 days of the year, 24/7. That means we are directly connected to that essence of Jerusalem that so many people around the world from all religions, all monotheistic religions at least, share as a yearning, as something they do from afar. And we are here, and here we are. But it's interesting that in the past weeks, we were also in exile in Jerusalem. A very strange sensation that I, as someone who spent almost his entire life in Jerusalem, except for a few years on the Upper West Side, felt that this distance from Jerusalem in the core sense of the word is something that we felt also here, which I think was an interesting spiritual experiment that I didn't anticipate that I will have, which also brings us to the notion that the concepts of here and there have changed over the course of the last few weeks. If it was very, very clear that when we are here, we're here, and when we're there, we're there, now we can be here and there, or neither. And there's a whole new set of associations with place and space as a result of this drama that we're all going through. So that is something that I thought you would be interested in hearing our perspective from the point of view of people being in Jerusalem, but actually not in Jerusalem, because we are in our home. And our home is our private domain, and this is very similar to your homes, where you are now hunkering during these times. But before we start our textual journey that we planned, I actually would like Naamah to describe to us how a few hours ago she actually attended a real Tikkun Shavuot, not a virtual one, in a real place with real people, with some social distancing and keeping the rules, but actually it was in a place and not on Zoom. And now to you.
Yeah, so one of the unique opportunities of this period is that there have been tikkunim going for days, almost, pre-tikkun and international and 24 hours. So I began yesterday Jerusalem time at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which was 9 o'clock in the morning New York time, on a couple of Zoom classes, and to begin our Tikkun, sponsored by Hebrew Union College, along with the secular yeshiva of Jerusalem and the Department of Returning Shlichim of the Jewish Agency. And we have become, over the years, a place that attracts young adults to our Tikkun. And that's because some 20 years ago, actually at the college in our beautiful courtyards, if those of you have been there, some 20 years ago, we were one of the first institution to offer public tikkunim, bringing well-known writers and thinkers. I believe Mayor Shalev opened our tikkun I think close to 20 years ago. And although more traditional tikkunim always took place in the home, we were among the first to start these public tikkun Leil Shavuot. And then of course it began to spread and spread. And those of you who are Israeli, also Israeli movie aficionados know that the famous movie Footnote begins with one of the celebs going from Tikkun to Tikkun to Tikkun, which was a real Jerusalem joke of these stars who go from one place to another to teach. So much so that competition almost killed us in HUC, and we decided some 8 years ago to turn it over to young people and find partners. And normally it would be an evening with hundreds of young adults, those who could study in a more traditional way and also a halachic way, and those who live music, etc. Last night also, I guess this is also typical of today, at 9 o'clock at night, Israel time, part of our tikkun was to interview Rabbi Angela Buchtal of Central Synagogue, one of our Israeli students, interviewing her in English, a wonderful session, which was Zoom bombed by Nazis. It was my first experience of a Zoom bomb. Pretty upsetting and really threw us, even though we were able to stop it. So that was one experience. It took us a while to get back on Zoom. And then I could wander over to Hebrew Union College to see in our courtyards, where we had no more than 30 people at social distances studying together. We had a series on pairs talking to each other's couples, colleagues on dialoguing, the theme being face-to-face. So that was Jerusalem last night, which was not completely, usually a city where hundreds and hundreds of people are walking from Tikkun to Tikkun into the old city. It was much more calm, but life has returned a little bit. So now to our text study. So I'm not sure where I am at this point or what time it is. Getting back towards my time. So Elan will open.
So first of all, before we begin, just take in this beautiful vista of Jerusalem that I'm sure you all miss. And I also remind you that parts of Jerusalem we also miss, even though we've been moving around quite freely for quite a while. And I would say that our challenge in the next, in the remaining time of this session, is to reflect a little bit about the complexity and the challenge of the return to Jerusalem in the context of modern times, because Jerusalem for many, many centuries was mostly a kind of a spiritual space, a place you certainly don't touch or arrive at, and most likely you will not live in. And what happens when a dream comes true and you have the challenge of returning to Jerusalem and trying to fulfill that dream of centuries in a real setting with real issues, with real challenges, and so on and so forth. So there are many ways of looking at this question. One of the themes that we chose is the challenge of creating Jerusalem as a city of justice, and that is because the association of justice and Jerusalem is actually quite rooted in our sources. And we're going to do a little bit of basic Jewish theology and a few references that create this association between Jerusalem and justice, that Jerusalem is a place of justice, and Jerusalem will be actually assessed by the ability to create justice within it. That's a criteria for the return for Jerusalem, and the question that we will pose towards the end: are we actually meeting this criteria with our doing in Jerusalem, not only with our being in Jerusalem? So it always takes us back to Isaiah chapter 1 with the very famous phrase: "Ashiva shoftaich kebarishona, veyoatzaich kevatchila, ואחרי כן יקרא לך עיר הצדק, קריה נאמנה, וציון במשפט תיפדה ושביה בצדקה." Would you like to read the
I
English?
will restore your judges as in the past, and your counselors at the beginning. After that, you will be called the city of justice, faithful city. Zion will be redeemed with justice, her repentant ones with righteousness. I'll just say, I'll interrupt my husband, even though we agreed we wouldn't. Zion b'mishpat tipadeh is also an acronym used, and this is great Jewish trivia, by one of the first Jewish fraternities. And if anyone could guess this, it's 100 points. ZBT. ZBT was founded as a Zionist fraternity at City College in New York. You may ask me, how do you know this? It's because my grandfather, Rabbi Felix Levy, was among the founders of ZBT. And if you ever met a ZBT member, they recite the names of the founders and they always say Levy. So it was one of the earliest Jewish fraternities. It had Zionist leanings. And my grandfather was a very interesting Reform rabbi who was critical in moving the Reform movement towards Zionism. More later.
So again, it's interesting that the association is with justice and with righteousness. There could have been other wonderful associations of Jerusalem with other beautiful values such as aesthetics, spirituality, and other things. But justice is really a key concept of what is the experiment that we are going through. And actually, this is being brought to a test in these very days as a very dramatic trial is taking place in modern Jerusalem to our prime minister, who is now brought to court with shoftim, with judges in Jerusalem. And actually, there was a very famous phrase that entered the Israeli political discourse years ago by Menachem Begin, who was known as a real custodian of democracy. And when once there was a verdict in the Israeli Supreme Court that was not to his taste or to his preference, he accepted it, and he said something which resonates in the Israeli discourse: Yesh shoftim b'Yerushalayim. There are judges in Jerusalem. And that is a wonderful modern manifestation of this idea that Jerusalem is a place where justice needs to prevail. And if we look into some of the liturgy, that especially the liturgy during the holidays that would be read on Shavuot, among other holidays, that the whole notion of exile is connected to the fact that we have sinned, and because of that we were expelled from our land. Because of our sins, we were exiled from our land, and we were far from it, and we are unable to ascend and to come in front of you and bow towards you and perform our duties in your house. So there's a whole association of galut, of exile, as an expulsion as a result of our sins, and only when we return, and when we return in the framework of justice, then redemption will come. And this again appears in theology, in the liturgy, and just another liturgical reference that shows how these ideas resonate. We say, ולירושלים עירך ברחמים תשוב ותשכון בתוכה, כאשר דיברת ובנה אותה בקרוב בימינו בניין עולם, וכיסא דוד עבדיך מהרה לתוכה תכין. In other words, that's part of the return of God into Jerusalem as a city of justice. And in this textual journey, which will lead us soon to some modern textual journey, I would like to ask Nami to teach us a few phrases from the Psalms, from Tehillim.
So I've chosen two psalms, which are among the psalms that are dedicated to Jerusalem. One is much more familiar to you. We'll do that next. But Psalm 122, I think, very much tells the aspirational hope for a city based on justice and diversity and plurality and plurality. If I would argue, as when we talk about tribes, we're not only talking about the tribes, the Israelite tribes, but You can't sit in Jerusalem today and hear the church bells during, not hear the church bells or the muezzin coming out of the mosque. So you literally hear this in a 24-hour cycle. So Shir Hamalot, we're always going up to Jerusalem. I rejoice when they said, let us go up to Beit Adonai, let us go up. Omdot hayu ragleinu, our feet are standing within thy gates. Jerusalem, built as a city that is compact. I don't particularly like that translation, but chubra la yachdav, bringing, joined together. It is a city joined together by so many pieces. And again, I'm reading this sitting today in 2020, and it's joined by neighborhoods, ancient neighborhoods, neighborhoods that the British left us starting in the 1920s. And then, of course, with the establishment of the State of Israel from 1948 until 1967. In 1967, Jerusalem becomes a totally different city. So it's not concentric at all. It's different pieces. It's like a huge puzzle of so many different histories and narratives and peoples. And you can literally walk between the centuries when you walk in Jerusalem, whether you're walking in among the ancient walls or you're coming into the modern city. And you can stand on a spot and see an ancient, more older church, and we look out and we see the church from the Valley of the Cross. And if you look up, you see the modern, some might call it the modern temple, which is the Israel Museum. So Jerusalem is a kind of in your face in the best sense, just overflowing with this abundance of narratives and stories and peoples. And what is our responsibility? Shesham alu shvatim, all of them came up to Jerusalem to give thanks to the Lord. And also, it's not just about giving thanks. We sat in the seats of judgment and justice, mishpat, in the tradition of the house of David. And of course, who initiates the house of David? Of course, the story of Ruth. We are reading this Megillat Ruth, and of course, Ruth is built on chesed, the idea of compassion, of treating the stranger and the poor. So David comes directly from that line, and that's the kind of justice we pursue. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. This is what we hope all those who may they prosper, those that love her. What does it mean to love Jerusalem? We need to love all of her. Yehi shalom b'chelech, peace within our walls and prosperity within our palaces. And of course, again, in Jerusalem, you literally can see the palaces and the walls and the gates, and gates that are meant to be opening one into the other. Again, if we were sitting at Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem, it is actually built to join the old city to the new city, the east to the west, the modern to the past. That's how the Moshe Safdie conceived our campus, that we would be literally a skywalk between all these different pieces. And of course, Laman Achai V'Re'ai, for my brothers, my sisters, let us not just pursue peace, let us speak peace, let us talk to one another, and let us look for good. And often Tov in Hebrew is associated with abundance. Tov needs to be shared. The good, the abundance. And now this is a psalm many of you are familiar with, Psalm 126. We sing it every time we sit down to a Shabbat meal or a holiday meal before Birkat HaMazon, before we say the grace after meals. During the week, we remember we were on the rivers of Babylon, but throughout centuries of history, it's really remarkable. And in fact, it was the runner-up for Israel's national anthem. But Hatikva beat out Psalm 126. And sadly, the reason, or maybe not sadly, depending on your ideology, the reason it was ultimately rejected is that the name of God appears in it. And some of the staunchest secularists were opposed to that, and Hatikva won out. But again, if you read these ancient words, you see how much it is a fitting anthem. When we returned to Zion, we were like dreamers, okay? And our mouths, Azim alei schok pinu, we were filled with joy, with laughter. And we could say among the nation, look what God has done for us. Again, if you ask the origin of Jewish humor, maybe it begins in this psalm, that joy and humor and laughter, we have to take the world seriously, but not ourselves seriously. Higdil Adonai Lasot, this is what God did for us, and we were happy. We rejoice. We often think of ourselves of not just the ever dying people, the ever suffering people, and we certainly have enough suffering, but also part of returning to the land is being so-called normal, being allowed to be happy, to pursue joy and happiness and abundance, as long as we share, as long as we care for, again, the orphan and the widow and the weak and the vulnerable. And we return like streams in the dry land, ka'afikim ba'negev. And of course, what I think is the essence of Jewish history. It's one of the most important sound bites of our textual past. Hazorim bedima berina yiktsoru. Those who sow in tears shall reap in joy. It's not win, lose. It's about winning that. But we know that it's hard, and this is a period, particularly during our isolation, where I said this to myself almost every morning. May we also reap in joy, not just sow in tears of sadness, of loneliness, of grieving, of confusion and anxiety. May we remember the centuries-old words that we will reap in joy as well. And it ends with Haloch yelech u'bachol, the one who goes on his or her way weeping, beareth the seed, will come home again. Birina, no say, we will carry our sheaves in joy.
So fast forward. We are now entering the era of modern Zionism, late 19th century into the 20th century. Zionism uses the word Zion as the central phrase in the ideology. And we don't have to go into the definitions of Zionism, but clearly Jerusalem is there. But it's not clear in what way Jerusalem is positioned in modern Zionism. And as a matter of fact, many of the modern Zionists who are considered the founding generation of this project actually had a troubled relationship with Jerusalem, had a mixed feeling toward Jerusalem, and sometimes even avoided Jerusalem in the rush to create something new and fresh that Jerusalem did not lend itself to. But within the development of modern Zionist culture, there was a very famous song that was almost like a hymn that I would say that everybody sang up until it was pushed aside by Yerushalayim Shel Zahab, the Naomi Shemer song from 1967, or they perhaps became the two leading hymns of modern Jerusalem. And this is Me'al Pisgat Har HaTzofim, from the summit of Mount Scopus. And actually, even though we are coming after Idan Reichel, we will actually sing it to you now, just to get a little bit of a musical interlude into this session. And we'll sing the first verse of Me'al Pisgat Har HaTzofim because it has a beautiful Russian melody. And then I will say something about the big surprise of this song that most people don't know. So stay tuned.
And sing along from your...
Ready?
Not with the... On mute.
Me'al Pisgat Har HaTzofim Eshtach Velach Hapayim Me'al Pisgat Har HaTzofim Shalom Lach Yerushalayim הדורות חלמתי עלייך, לזכות לראות פנייך, ירושלים, ירושלים, מחרבותייך. Thank you for the spontaneous guitar accompaniment. So the verse that we just sang, and this was just a bonus for you, Abby, our singing, says from the summit of Mount Scopus, and you can imagine and picture this scene. I will prostrate myself to you from the summit of Mount Scopus, O Jerusalem, peace unto you. And this is the phrase that connects us from the past to the present. For 100 generations, I have dreamt of you, to merit, to cry, and behold the light of your countenance. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, light up your face to your son. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, from your ruins I will build you. As someone who's third generation in Jerusalem, and my grandparents moved here in 1911, I would say that this is something that resonates to me in a very personal way. But when I wrote my book on Jerusalem, which, by the way, I started looking into modern songs, popular songs, folk songs about Jerusalem, and of course I went into the history of this song, which was written in the 1920s by a Tel Aviv-based songwriter and a journalist by the name of Avigdor Hameiri. And I realized that there is a second verse to this song that most of us don't know. And if you go in the internet, you'll immediately find it, and it goes like this. We will not sing it. And this is really the beginning of the questioning of whether we can actually restore Jerusalem in the context of justice. And he says, this is the second verse of the song that nobody knows and nobody sings. He says,
with a confident heart I came here to build you from your ruins. But how can I build your temple if there's no peace among your children? Sephardim, Ashkenazim, Yemenites, Falasha, Urafals, Georgian, Haredim, and free or secular, Chofshim. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, this is not what I had in my dreams. Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim, bring on peace to your children.
So this is really a surprising flipping upside down of the original message. This is not just about yearning to come back and the fact that we have begun the return to Jerusalem. This is also a sense of both the challenge and perhaps the failure of our ability to recreate Jerusalem as a city of justice. And this, as you all know, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this yourselves, and you have your own personal relationship to Jerusalem. This is really something that goes in an inherent tension between the spiritual and the mundane, between Yerushalayim shel Mala and Yerushalayim shel Mata, between the conceptual and the actual. All these things are the tensions of a place like Jerusalem once you bring it to an actualization. And who is the person who managed to capture this tension in the best way? And I assume you're all going to nod, and that is the poet Yehuda Amichai, who was I think labeled by Professor Sidra Ezrahi de Koven as someone who managed to create the poetry of the bridging between the two Jerusalems, between that spiritual Jerusalem and the actual Jerusalem. There are literally hundreds of Jerusalem poems by Amichai, or poems on Jerusalem by Amichai. And we chose, for this evening, we chose two, and we will start with the first one.
Okay, I did not bring the Hebrew. This is from Amichai's last book, Open, Closed, Open, Patuach, Sagur, Patuach, which actually in the Hebrew version, it's a little blue book that people have named the secular Sidur. It's probably his most religious, spiritual, arguing with God, using biblical characters. He makes biblical characters come alive again, walking the streets of Jerusalem. But I chose this poem because, like so many of our holidays, they are Yemei Zikaron, they are days of remembering, but also days of forgetting. You know, when we rejoice, we put aside some of our sadness. And he, as you know, Jerusalem, unlike Tel Aviv and Haifa, the other major cities, does not have a sea, does not have an ocean. Although in Hebrew, an abbreviation of Yerushalayim, you take the Yud of the beginning and the Mem Sofi of the end of Jerusalem, and you hyphen in the middle, and it spells Yam, which means sea. So playing on that idea, I think Yehuda Amichai writes, there are days when everything is sales and more sales. And if I can ask you, for those of you who've been here, to almost close your eyes and walk in the shuk, in the old city, and look up and see some of these items blowing in the wind. Even though there's no sea in Jerusalem, not even a river, everything is sales. The flags, the prayer shawls, the black coats, the monks' robes, the kaftans, the kafiyas, young women's dresses and headdresses, Torah mantles and prayer rugs. You can have t-shirts if you look up in the streets of Jerusalem. Feelings that swell in the wind, and hopes that set them sailing in other directions. Even my father's hands spread out in blessing, like the high priest, you might say. My mother's broad face and Ruth's faraway death are sails, all of them sails in the splendid regatta of the two seas, Shnei Yameha Shel Yerushalayim, the sea of memory and the sea of forgetting. So Jerusalem, actually, it's almost impossible to forget as you walk these streets. But the question is, what memories, and how do we flow together? How do we make it feel like a light breeze that we can live together? There are times when walks in the old city where literally people are pouring in, Christian pilgrims and ultra-Orthodox and Orthodox and secular, all going, this one going to a church, this one going to a mosque, these going to the wall. And what is our responsibility? To be parallel play, to walk by each other, to pretend the other doesn't exist? That's our great challenge. How do we not just flow past each other? How do we talk to one another? How do we share this sea, this Yam, this Yerushalayim?
So I think we already can discern that Yehuda Amichai was fascinated by the duality that Jerusalem faces, the duality between two very extreme experiences, the spiritual and the mundane, Shel Mala and Shel Mata. And we also, we could have brought his very famous poem called Tourists, where there's the duality between the visitors and the locals, something which we in Jerusalem feel very strongly in non-pandemic times, when sometimes we feel that we're inundated with outsiders who are disrupting our lives as the locals, but on the other hand, we want them here because we feel that we are custodians of Jerusalem. So this whole sense of Jerusalem being two, the number two, a duality, is something which is very strong. And as a matter of fact, it even is reflected in the word Yerushalayim, just like there is a case of yad and yadayim and regel and raglaim and so on and so forth. That the Hebrew language has a special form for a pair before we go into the plural. So this is actually reflected in the name of the city of Yerushalayim. And of course, that was a great opportunity for Amichai to write a little poem, which I think exemplifies this tension. He says, Lama Yerushalayim tamid shtayim, shel mala veshel mata, ואני רוצה לחיות בירושלים של אמצע, בלי לחוות את ראשי למעלה ובלי לפצוע את רגליי למטה. ולמה ירושלים בלשון זוגית, כמו ידיים ורגליים? אני רוצה לחיות רק בירושל אחת, כי אני רק אחד ולא עיניים. Now, it is a very tricky poem to translate, and I would not dare to do it myself. Luckily, it was done by people who know how to translate Amichai, who plays with the Hebrew language in such a creative way, sometimes in a way that is lost in translation. But let's see what translation job was done by neither of us.
Why is Jerusalem always two? Of above and below, and of course, another translation would be the celestial and the earthly, right? And I want to live in Jerusalem of in between, without hitting my head above, without injuring my foot below. And why is Jerusalem like a pair of hands and legs, the plural? I want to live in one Yerushalem, Yerushalem or Yerushal, because I am only one eye and not many eyes.
So again, this was a very difficult poem to translate. And I think that, you know, if I look at both our shared worlds, Nami and mine, in Jerusalem, we've been together for 44 years here in the city, and also our separate worlds in Jerusalem. I think we very much buy into this notion that we are living in Yerushalayim shel Emtza. We're trying to be in the middle. We're trying to be, on the one hand, with the awareness that we don't live in a regular place. We are not in Tel Aviv or Haifa or Ashdod or Tiberias or New York. No, New York is special. Let's not get into that. Or in Dallas and so forth. We live in a place that comes with a certain baggage, and therefore it's not just on the earth. But on the other hand, we certainly do not live constantly in some kind of a spiritual, aspirational domain. We live in a real situation, and we take responsibility as much as we can. And we found ourselves, both in our separate and shared experiences, we found ourselves very active in a very exciting work that has been done in Jerusalem over the years to try and create a city of justice. How can I help you here?
Yeah, go back to the last slide. Sorry.
A city of justice in the context of our times. And you can say that we are social activists. We can say that we are highly engaged people, but it's not just us. There's one of the things that I think we can certainly talk about and also prove, not tonight because it's too late and it will take too much time, that there is a spirit of mission among many people in Jerusalem, that by being in Jerusalem today, it is our mission to try as much as we can to keep the city with a high moral standard as much as possible. Now, this also sounds a little bit pretentious and self-righteous, and I don't want to go there. But I would say that there is a very strong community of activism and a spirit of activism in Jerusalem that transcends groups and neighborhoods and social classes and religion, and keeps the city, I think, in a very high level, or at least in parts of the city, a high level of an awareness and a consciousness of social justice. I chose one picture on top, and then Nami chose a picture in the bottom, which we'll talk about. And the picture on the top is a scene that you can observe every once in a while in Jerusalem, of what we call the dialogue circles, Ma'agalei Siach, which is sponsored by all kinds of groups in Jerusalem that bring together people from all walks of life in the city of Jerusalem and the complexity of Jerusalem into dialogue, listening, sharing, getting to know one another. That is, of course, it happens occasionally after some terrible things happen in Jerusalem, with violence and hatred and so forth. But the response is, we got to do something about it. We got to fix it. And the fixing of moral flaws in Jerusalem, I think, is a very powerful thing that takes place in many circles that we will not go into details, except for one example that is exemplified in the bottom picture that Nami will discuss.
I apologize for a little self-promotion of the Hebrew Union College's attempt to know the responsibility of living, as I described, or being at this epicenter of Old and New Jerusalem, East and West Jerusalem. And a number of years ago, many of us were feeling that the way Jerusalem Day is celebrated had become so nationalistic and so xenophobic and so one-sided that we had to begin to take it back, and created a Jerusalem for everybody, or at least attempt to reclaim that day, or reclaim the fact that, as I said earlier, there are many parts to Jerusalem. And over time, we developed a program for teachers, Muslim, Christian, Jewish teachers who teach in East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem. And many East Jerusalem schools are actually under the purview of the municipality's education department. So teachers are given incentives to go to do in-service training. And we created a program called the Teacher's Room, or the Teacher's Lounge, where teachers of these different backgrounds come together to share how they teach Jerusalem, El Quds. Where do they live? What is their lives in Jerusalem? What do we share, and what's separate? Do either of us know the map of Jerusalem? Who's on what side, and how you get there, and how people get around Jerusalem? And what's it like to wear a hijab in Shuk Machane Yehuda, in the Machane Yehuda Shuk? And part of this program, first of all, the program is in Hebrew and Arabic. Everything is translated. Everything is co-facilitated by a Hebrew-speaking facilitator and an Arabic-speaking facilitator. So no language is privileged. It's a wonderful program that every year we get, we're in our 6th year now. We started with 20, and we moved to 30 and 60 teachers, and we have now impacted in scores of schools where not just one teacher, 2 teachers have worked with us in this method of sharing and dialoguing. This program is named for the memory of Shira Banki, who is this lovely young 16-year-old who was killed when she was marching in the Gay Pride Parade. And her family felt that this project was the right kind of project to be named for her memory, a project that brings teachers together. Luckily we had time to do these, what we call these excursion into each other's homes and schools in late January and February, and then we had to go to Zoom for the rest of the program. But next week we're actually going to be celebrating on Zoom the end of the program, and we do hope to reopen again. And with each group of teachers, we feel from the ground up, we're having a slow and steady impact. And what I'll say, and maybe we have a time, I don't know, Abby, are you there, Rabbi? Okay, maybe people have asked questions on chat. I just wanted to say, or raise your hand. I just want to say, going back to my grandfather, Rabbi Felix Levy, who had founded ZBT, gave up a promising career in faithful and became a Reform rabbi, became one of the more outspoken Zionist Reform rabbis at a time when it was not popular. Came here for the founding of Hebrew University, 1925. He comes because his colleague and friend Judah Magnus, who's a Reform rabbi, the first chancellor and president of Hebrew University, he comes.
And there he was, Me'al Pisgat Haratzofim.
And he was there in Mount Scopus in 1925. And days that I despair for the future of Jerusalem, I think in my grandfather's wildest, insane dreams, he could never have imagined that his granddaughter and his grandson founded a Reform synagogue in Jerusalem, and that we among the people who have founded progressive Judaism in Israel. Never in his wildest dreams could he have imagined an Israel, a Jerusalem like that. So I take inspiration from him from that day, April 1st, 1925, what he couldn't imagine. So in these times also, the things we cannot imagine, and they will be good. They will be tov.
So we took you tonight on a nocturnal tour of Jerusalem and a journey into some of the questions that modern Jerusalem poses to all of us. And at this point, I would like to stop the share screen and open up in the last few minutes to any of your comments or questions, if you still have the energy to say something, until Abby will ask us to leave the room.
Good. We still have 5 minutes. I would like to say that it was so beautiful hearing the two of you sing together. I think especially during the sheltering in place, it made me realize how long it's been since I've heard people sing so sweetly and beautifully, just like live and I would say impromptu, even though you clearly planned it. So thank you for that little gift on top of the actual Torah you were teaching us in that moment. Are there questions or comments? Yeah, Julia, do you have your hand up? You can unmute yourself anytime if you have a question. Julia, you're up.
Okay. Hi. So I'm a high school student. I recently spent 2 months in Jerusalem. I was supposed to be there for like 4 months, but because of the whole virus, yeah. So I was lucky enough to attend a Rosh Chodesh service with Women of the Wall. So I'm wondering, so I love your mission. I think it's amazing and incredible, and it's something that I think is really needed. And so I'm wondering if, if you do any sort of work with them, or what's the general like feeling about that organization? Yeah, I don't know my feelings about it. I'm kind of trying to figure that out still. So, yeah.
Yeah, first of all, the offices of Women of the Wall are on our campus, okay?
Okay.
And Anat Hoffman, who's obviously is so much of the energy behind Women of the Wall and in front of Women of the Wall and leading Women of the Wall, is also the executive director of the Israel Religious Action Center, and that's also on our campus. So we can't deny that they're certainly welcome.
Okay.
Not everyone in the liberal movements necessarily are as active in Women of the Wall as you might think. There are some of us who prefer mixed prayer, but certainly believe in the Women of the Wall's right to pray, and saddened and furious that after 2 years of working on a deal to create a different kind of space for Women of the Wall, not just Women of the Wall, all liberal Judaism. I don't know if you know, the conservative movement actually is leading a wonderful initiative that there's every Friday night, there's a Kabbalat Shabbat led by different liberal groups and individuals to at least be present in the Southern Wall area.
And that actually was.
And then they reopened, I believe, last Friday night. So.
Wow, yeah.
So they remain an important voice, often like the town crier, who no one sometimes no one's listening to, but it's important that we remember our right to pray and to wrap ourselves in a talit and so it remains an important voice. As I say, it's not officially, the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism supports them, but it's not, we've often brought our missions to be with them. So there's natural alignment.
Yeah.
And I believe they're back as well. I think they were there this last week for Rosh Chodesh Sivan.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, yeah, I identify with the conservative movement, and I've grown up in the conservative movement, and it was just really interesting for me to go to Jerusalem and see people that were a lot more observant than I was, and people of different religions kind of all coming. It was just so amazing for me to be there.
Mm-hmm.
We have some questions about the poem, about the elaborating the many eyes of Jerusalem. Susan, I can't see if Susan's still with us or awake.
Yes.
I actually, Susan is asleep. I'm her partner, Denny. I'm on her computer. Hi, everyone. I first just want to say thank you so much. This was very inspiring. And there was one line in the second poem of Yehuda Amichai, and the last line in English was about the many eyes. I'm only one eye. Let's see. I actually took a picture of the poem.
And while you're looking, it's great. And my eyes on the clock, just reminding everyone we have about 4 minutes that we're going to try and finish up, and then hopefully get on over to
Noah
Amini in the webinar main stages.
I can't find it in the photograph, but we can let it go.
Look,
it's a poem, and therefore we can discuss it for hours and hours because it's no longer the possession of the poet. So clearly, both because of the translation and any type of conversation we will have some other time on it, we can take it into all kinds of directions.
It's worthwhile getting the book in English even. Yeah.
What's the title of the book?
Open, Closed, Open.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other final?
I can't believe how many of you stayed on.
Let me just add one more sentence. This could have been a question also. How did Jerusalem go through the pandemic, or is going through the pandemic? It's an interesting observation, which again we don't have time to go into. But Jerusalem has been very calm, and there was a softening of boundaries, even though there were some pockets of the spread of the pandemic. But in terms of the way people related to each other and helped each other and shared the experience across the identity divides here between ultra-Orthodox and non-Orthodox, Jews and Arabs, people in different neighborhoods. Actually, Jerusalem performed very well in this period, with a lot of solidarity, a sense that the authorities are doing the right job. So actually, when you go out, people are actually nice to each other, something which we don't always experience in day-to-day Yerushalayim Shel Mata. So I think.
And as far as the many eyes, it's true, we are all many eyes. I think also Amichai is being ironic. He's playing with the words, but
okay.
He knows more than anyone. And I can say, as someone who feels that I am both a Jerusalemite and an Upper West Sider, and I feel for the pain you're going through in Manhattan. I cannot tell you how much. So I really want to express my love, my devotion, and my hope and my prayer for you, for all of us. So we are many eyes. And again, the silver lining, perhaps, of this crazy period is that we can be together in ways we never thought.